Okay, I think that was enough buffer time for all participants to arrive. And with that, I welcome you all to this final web conference of our MAMBA project. Yeah, we're delighted to see you all here digitally. Yeah, our MAMBA project is coming to an end. That's why it's the final event. MAMBA is a project which was funded by the Interreg Baltic Sea region program. Our final conference we have termed No Future for Rural Europe, breaking the vicious circle with successful mobility and accessibility ideas. Yeah, in this spirit, actually, we are going to conduct this web conference series, I have to say. My name is Hakan Uras from REM Consult. We are a Hamburg-based company which is supporting EU-funded projects. As such, we have been following and supporting the MAMBA project from day one, and we're very excited and inspired also to actually finish the project now with this highlight event. Our final conference is actually the end of a series of other events, which you can see here. What we have called rural mobility seminars. We have conducted 5 of them throughout the project duration of 3 years. Here you can see the different topics they have dealt with. You will find the documentation of each of these events also on our website. And the final conference was supposed to be conducted in Berlin, but of course, due to the reasons you all know and which we have all been acquainted to and are familiar with, we are meeting here online now, and we are still delighted that actually there's such a big interest and huge turnout actually to this event, which is probably also a good side effect since it is easier to participate online than coming to Berlin. But of course, we would have loved to see you all in Berlin as well in person. Back then we were thinking of the state of the art of rural mobility and its future, and also in this respect we have planned this final web conference series. So it's a 3-parted online event basically, which lasts around 1.5 hours each. Today we will start with setting the scene and exploring the challenge of rural mobility and accessibility of services in rural areas. As you can see, we have also 2 other events upcoming. And if you haven't yet, we would also invite you, of course, to register for those. In the next session, we will go a bit further after having set the scene today, a bit more in depth into practical examples, lessons learned from mobility and accessibility projects on the ground. And in the 3rd session, we are gonna try to have an outlook into the future actually of rural mobility, and also in the policy implications this would have. So we invite you to register for these events as well. A couple of etiquette guidance here in each online event. We have been accustomed to, and we should all know, but it's always good to repeat it again. So always remember to mute your microphone if you don't speak. This goes, of course, especially for our speakers, but in the breakout rooms later, this might be also relevant for the participants. And if you want to speak, of course, unmute the mic. So we are recording the event also for documentation purposes. And all presentations as well will be available after the webinar. If you want to ask questions during the presentations now in the plenary, you can do so in the chat window, which you will find on the right-hand side. Yeah, and if you haven't written it in your name already, in your participant's name, it would be nice if you introduce your organizational affiliation as well, which makes it probably easier for the speaker to answer to your question and to get a little bit of context. Yeah, we will after the first three speakers, we will move into breakout rooms. You will receive I think you will receive a link for these breakout rooms, those which you have chosen later from our colleagues. And then we will, you will just have to click the link and you will move within the Zoom application to that room. Yeah, in each room there will be a presenter and a facilitator. And as I was already saying, there you can also engage in spoken form in the discussion. For that, we try to get a little bit of order. So if you really want to ask something or have a comment after the speeches, after the presentations, please write the question mark in the chat window, and then so we can moderate the discussion there as well. But if you like, you can also just type in your question in the chat window. Yeah, with that, I would actually start the conference now with the program. So this is the first session. As I said, we're setting the scene here and exploring the challenge. Before we go into details, I would like to give the word to Heiko Naas, who's the head of the diacony of Schleswig-Holstein, our lead partner in MAMBA, who will welcome the guests.
Thank you very much, Mr. Uras. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Heiko Naas, the head of the diacony in Schleswig-Holstein, and I want to give you a warm welcome to our final web conference on behalf of the Diakonisches Werk Schleswig-Holstein. I better have to say that this is the first session of a series of conferences that we are launching today. Mr. Urs has explained it in his introductions. First of all, I hope you are all healthy and that your families will remain healthy in the coming months. At the moment, we undergo very challenging times, and in the same way, we have great responsibilities for our tasks, in our work contexts, for the employees, and for all those to whom our work is directed. I would have loved to welcome you all personally to our final conference in Berlin. I very much regret that we cannot hold a presence event, but because I have always taken a great benefit of personal contacts during a conference. But we are getting more and more used to digital meetings, and so I hope we will have an inspiring exchange and many interesting and deeper insights in MAMBA today and during the next conferences. The pandemic period has revealed that in many places there are still gaps in the social service sector. And it had also indicated new needs. This also applies to the wide field of mobility. In other words, precisely those tasks we have set ourselves in our MAMBA project over the past 3 years. I would like to thank all partners for trusting us as the lead partner of the project. It is a transnational partnership of 16 partners from the Baltic Sea region who have been involved in this project. You will have the chance to get an insight into this diversity in the course of these conferences. The results are also documented in different publications of the project. Thanks also to our team in the Diakonie in Schleswig-Holstein and to our partner of the project management team, When Consult. Together they accompanied and supported all partners over this long time of period. Now, the journey of 3 years has nearly come to its end. I am grateful for everyone who shares the ambitions of the project to provide innovative mobility cases in order to make a positive difference for their communities. Thank you very much and have a good conference.
Thank you very much, Heiko Naas. This warm welcome words, and I think this were very moving words, and in this very challenging times we are facing. And he's also mentioned it was a long way and a long road. The MAMBA project has evolved and developed, and we're very happy what the partners have achieved on the ground in their local context. But of course, the MAMBA project is also striving to to transfer or to disseminate the results. And as we're speaking here, our final outputs are in the last round, so to speak, to be finalized, and they will be available shortly on our website. So also invite you to follow us and to visit our website, where you will find the different outputs, which not only picture the journey we have taken, but also give concrete guidance and also policy recommendations, which we will go into a bit more in detail later, and also in the other sessions which are about to come. But now I would like to hand over the word to Laurie Pickup, our keynote speaker, who is our distinguished expert of European transport policy, and has a lot of experience, and will provide his insights to kick off this conference. Laurie, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just try and share the screen. I can't until you've released the screen, apparently. Okay.
There you go.
Thank you very much. let's see how this goes. Is that okay now?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Can I thank the MAMBA Consortium for giving me the opportunity to address you this morning, and I can only echo Heiko's comments in the introduction. That wouldn't it have been marvelous for us all to meet face to face and have that interaction? What Susan Pinker calls the village effect in her excellent book, and I really do think that you know, the virtual world enables more people to join, but there's that there's that chemistry that we try to reproduce, and let's see if we can do it in these virtual conferences. I want to start by going back an awful long way. In the 1960s, I was at school and I wasn't really liking my French classes. I learned French in a town called Folkestone, where the Channel Tunnel now exists. And we could see France across the water, but they never actually put us on a boat so that we could listen to French people. And what they did was rather make us learn entire pages of French that somehow was meant to make us learn the language. And I remember, I can still remember these pages more than half a century afterwards. Roland est tout seul dans la vallée, and so on. And these things stuck with me over the years. The next time a mantra really struck home to me was in around the year 2000, when I was getting involved in the Civitas program for the European Commission, something I ended up being involved in for the last 20 years. And all of the European Commission officers, they had their standard slideshow with the standard slides, and they would all share them out, so they all spoke from the same hymn book. And so you would go to various conferences, and these conferences would all start by saying, 80% of people live in urban areas. Everyone is moving to urban areas. Urban areas are growing. Urban areas are the best thing since sliced bread. And I found myself sitting there saying, yes, 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 tout seul, dans la... And so you get these mantras. And so this has been the mantra from 2000 to 2020. The only problem is that while this mantra was going on, rural transport was forgotten. And yet, you know, rural areas are not the sleepy areas we think they are. They're areas, as many people listening in will know, are areas of rapid change. There's a new mix, mindsets, values, expectations. These are dynamic areas. And what people don't realize is that mobility innovation really has strong potential for economic growth and better social development in the diversity of rural areas across the European Union. We have to be proactive in making that happen. And that's what's important about MAMBA and the 2 or 3 other projects happening at the moment. It is time to act. And that's the point I want to make. Rural areas have political power. Because of the way the electoral systems work, you have to spread the vote not with the concentrations fully of population, but across the country. And so there are rural constituencies that can be very powerful. And I think we often underestimate that because there is potential here to drive our agenda forward with the political power that exists in the rural areas. You can see here's an example from Italy comparing the 2013-2018 elections. And you can see that in 2018, the rural areas in the south of Italy and Sardinia were the reason for the change of government as they swung across, and how the rural areas of central Italy went from centre left to centre right. But I could have given examples. I've looked at examples across the EU, and it happens all over. In Lithuania, the Farmers' Party, very, very strong. And so there is this political power that can be mobilized to help rural mobility. And then, of course, there's the issue about what is rural. And you'll hear various percentages, I'm sure, in the presentations. 27% is the figure I've come up with. But there's a huge range of definitions of rural, and what is rural and what is urban across the member states. In Denmark, 300 persons is an urban area. 70% of the population live in small but urban defined settlements. So if we play around with the statistics, you quickly move from 27 to 33, and then some member states, it's already close to 50. So rural areas really are central in the looking at the Green Deal challenge and the efforts to achieve low carbon. They're a very, very important part of the agenda moving forward. And we need to redress this imbalance that over the last 20 years, rural transport projects have really disappeared, which is scandalous, really, given these statistics. If we look at rural areas in planning strategies, you see a lot of regional development studies. And when I look at a lot of these, you see that obviously, clearly, it focuses on economic growth, on demographic change, on economic change, and so on, and all these various sectors of the rural economy. But I always tend to feel that transport is sort of coming in as a bit of an add-on at the end. Now, there may be some of you in the audience are saying, no, in ours it wasn't. Well, please, can we hear it? Because that's not my experience. I did a review, because I'm a social scientist, I did a review of the social inclusion action plans of the EU states back in 2004, 2005. I found one reference to a transport study in County Clare in the west of Ireland. Otherwise, transport was not mentioned in the national action plans on social inclusion. It falls off the stool again. And in transport strategies, everything works from the urban area, and there may be a bit of rural at the end. So again, in all of these areas, rural transport, it's sort of falling off the stool. It's been ignored by most EU transport programs, certainly in Horizon 2020, Framework 7, Framework 6. You can count them on one hand. And of course, if you look at that geographically, particularly in those states where there is in the East, for example, where there is a strong urban-rural diversity, you're getting a double effect, because they were not represented very well in the programs, because their interests were not represented very well in the programs, because the urban-rural dichotomy was there in the program. So I go back to the day I started at the Road Research Lab, the government road research lab in the UK, in the summer of '78. And what was going on? They were doing rural transport experiments, RouteX. They were looking at dial-a-ride, carpooling, post buses, using school buses, all the things we're doing now. They were doing then in the late '70s. Of course, the dial-a-ride was done with a telephone and somebody writing in a diary. The technology was quite different. I was involved in the SAM Plus experiments in the '90s. This was from the Telematics Directorate, not the Transport Directorate, looking at how we could use ITS to improve dial-a-ride services. And that led to a revolution, indeed, in the quality of dial-a-ride services and demand responsive, as they're now called. Excuse me for using the old language. 2004, there was a single project in Framework 5 on rural transport, the ARTS project, probably lost now. I was in it. It produced guidelines on how to do rural transport studies and so on. But it was lost in the urban avalanche. And after 2010, of course, we get the app generation starting. So when we come to 2020, rural transport innovation, there is an opportunity here. There are these key projects at the moment, of which MAMBA is central, to actually start to change things again. They're the same ideas we might have had in the '70s, updated, however, with new technology and addressing a new type of rural society. Rural society has changed dramatically over the last 50 years. And one thing that strikes me is that we have an ELTIS system, the European Local Transport Information System. But wouldn't it be good if all of the intelligence of these projects could be put on a rural transport information system? And I think there's a real call for something like that. And the other thing from a policy point of view, when I listen to some of the really interesting innovations, such as the Resipus hitchhiking in France, which is very, very popular and catching on. And I stand back from an ethical point of view and with my gender hat on, because I do a lot of gender work, and I think, do we really want rural transport to be women and girls sitting on benches at the edge of cities waiting for lifts? That's putting it bluntly, of course. But when you stand back, what do we want rural transport to be for quality? And as I was told last week by David Gray up at Aberdeen University, who's worked in rural areas for 25 years, the most popular mode of someone who doesn't own a car in a rural area is somebody else's car. So we need to get some sense of reality in this. And now, where are we in 2020? And this was a very important report that was done for the European Commission last year from the Strategic Transport Research and Innovation Action towards the Horizon Europe programme, to explain where we are in terms of transport and innovation. And what it's basically saying is that there's an awful lot of sustainable mobility, shared mobility, but it's not really getting through despite its disruptive profile. And in this, I like to draw a parallel with the fashion industry. In spring, the new innovations come down the catwalk in the fashion industry. They look marvelous. Some of them we might think look a bit bizarre. But within months, all of elements of those catwalk designs you can buy at every quality of store, right down to Primark at the bottom. Everybody gets a little bit of those innovations to wear. Then they become solutions. What do we have in transport? All I can see is program after program with technology after technology, new ideas, new technologies, and they're not being adopted. The word is adoptability. You know, you have to get these things adopted. And so you've got a logjam in transport. It doesn't happen in the fashion industry. And one of the problems is that you have to best fit these technologies. You have to use your local DNA. What's the usual way you do things? I've spoken on this subject at the Civitas Forum last year. The best way to look forward is to look back. Understand yourself. Once you understand yourself, you know how to adapt new technologies, and rural transport innovations are important. What we do in MAMBA, in Smarter, in High Reach, Inclusion, and so on, need to be adapted and tailored to the local event. But if we get the balance right, we can increase adoptability and accelerate green market growth. And bottom-up approaches are absolutely vital. And this is a strength, as we all know, in our rural communities. Look at the efforts that people put in to getting mobility going in our local communities. And local politicians, we focus on the measures, but there are many, many local politicians. They're not the mayor of Paris, they're not the mayor of Copenhagen. They don't get the profile, but we need to get them on stage, because there's an awful lot of very active politicians in the European Union, from local communes right the way through, who need profiling. And also, and this is a technique that I've developed with Professor Peter Jones at UCL, we both did this, is that the measures that we're looking at are down there on the bottom left, but they're only one of 8 dimensions as to what you have to do to best fit your measure to the local circumstances in the rural area. We call it the 8 M's. I'm not sure people read lots of guidelines these days, but something like that is very simple, and you can use it. And it just shows you can't just address the measure itself or the technology and expect the rest to happen on its own. So how do we currently plan rural mobility? Well, the first answer is we don't. I'm a member of the Smarter project, and there's an excellent review that was done of the EU countries and some additional countries. And we only found 4 countries where there were integrated plans for rural transport, integrated plans. When we look, rural transport is an offshoot of urban mobility issues. So strangely, it's at the end of the chain of thought, and yet it's the source of the food. So it's a very, very ironic. And so therefore we ask, well, can the SUMP process help us? Well, it can't really, because it's a topic guide. It's an add-on to something that is predominantly urban. It's coming from the urban area. And therefore I don't see SUMPs as being a great help here. And then you have to look, as I said, I do a lot of gender work. A question that's always asked, what would cities look like if they were designed by women? And you can ask the same question here. What would cities look like if they were designed by those people with a rural mindset? It might be a bit different. What we need to do is to reverse the mindset. How should we plan for rural areas and rural mobility? The answer is to plan from the rural area, not from a chain that starts with the urban area. The important thing here, political will to do it, and the finance to do it, and the commitment to do it. We need to reverse the mindset. What we need is strong community engagement. And this is something that the rural areas have. You know from your trials, from your experiments, the absolute dedication that people in rural areas have to give up their time to get rural transport moving against all the odds, They have to serve the different needs of rural society these days: farm to fork, fishing, forestry, mining, tourism. But the key point here is we need proactive planning for rural areas, not what I call afterthought planning. I'm going to show 4 slides now, just that I used in a webinar about a month ago, so apologies to people that were on that, but it just shows what the rural society looks like these days. And there's a huge diversity across Europe. The cocktail is different in different countries, but of course we start with locals. This is the backbone of rural society and rural culture. It's the core. And this is where we build the policy up from the rural culture, but they're not the only part of rural society these days. We have the incomers. We have the middle class incomers. These are people in some countries who had weekend homes. They used to have weekend homes. Now they're digital nomads. They're physical and digital. They work and live now in the rural area. They go up to London or up to Berlin 2 days a week. They have country style clothes, clean Range Rovers, never seen a field in their life. And they have what you might call an urban conversation. And I've seen in my area of the Cotswolds, where the Beckhams now live, the way in which society used to change about 6 o'clock on a Friday evening as all the locals went home and the weekenders used to arrive. I now live in Italy for the last 13, 14 years in a rural area. The Italians are not working in the fields anymore. They're not working in the rural areas. Many have moved away. And now we have Moroccan families, and there are other immigrants from other countries in this sort of European accessibility that's going on now. They drive mopeds. They're very old cars that break down, bicycles that always break down. And do I see the Moroccans integrating and being shared lifts with the Italians? Not really. I don't see a lot of that. But nevertheless, the incomers are an important part of rural society. And then you get the homecomers, people who've been away, but now perhaps with the internet, digital homecomers, reconnecting, they can now move back to their home areas, or maybe part of the year they can go back. You know, this old phrase, you can take a girl out of the village, but you cannot take the village out of the girl. I heard it in the African context there. I've also heard it in Ireland. It's a famous one, but it just shows that for most of us, although many of us might live in an urban area, that in your heart, you still have generations living in the countryside. You have generations who've got second homes in the countryside. You know, what the Romanians call the codru, the forest in your heart. It's still there. And finally, of course, the visitors, the fourth group of rural society, whether they're temporary, working in hotels, non-car owners, working in the fields, non-car owners, and then, of course, the entertainment and tourism industries. So now in different countries, there's a cocktail of this. So what does this mean? It means that rural transport needs and expectations are increasing, and they're more diverse than they were when I started 50 years ago. We need transport justice for rural areas, and therefore we have to move away from this strict dogma of predict and provide based on transport efficiency to achieve better social cohesion and look further to see how much economic growth we can attain by having reliable public transport, by having reliable mobility and accessibility. And we have the rural citizenship and belonging. Shared mobility has always been in rural areas. It's how it's always worked. But how can this collaborative mobility solution play and work from the locals across the other social groups? In Smarter 2, for example, there's a lovely trial of car sharing in the South Tyrol, and where they're trying to get the car sharing market that's recognized by the incomers, but they're trying to get it across into the other groups. And so what we need to do is, rather than see this as a negative thing, we need to turn social diversity in rural areas from an issue to an opportunity for mobility innovation. And I know that some of you are doing trials on these things, which the conference will obviously bring out. So what about the 2020s? We're moving from sumps to low carbon planning. I think my personal view is that sumps were a very good feature of the decade 2010 to 2020, particularly in those countries which didn't have a formal transport planning structure, but they were based primarily in urban areas. The idea to implement sustainable mobility measures is now taken for granted. The agenda is moving on. And we have to plan now for phygital mobility and accessibility. We can't separate the virtual from the physical anymore. It's phygital. It works together. It has to be part of the strategy. The focus now shifts from sustainability to low carbon and cross-sector benefits. But it also goes from the old predict and provide to a new vision and validate. You create your vision and then you say, this is how it is going to look, and we're going to work our way there. We're not going to say, well, what's the prediction and we've got to provide for that. We still do predict and provide too much, and you're not going to get low carbon from that. And this vision and validate, it also feeds the footprints of the younger generation. The new generation that's just reached driving age a couple of years ago, their generation footprint isn't like the millennials, a love of the internet and so on. These people were born after 2000. They were born into the internet. It's like oxygen. It's taken for granted. Their footprint is something else. Their footprint is the climate emergency, as I'm sure you all know. And in the 2020s, the whole urban-rural continuum has to come to the fore with the correct balance. And I finished this slide with a very strong point. 20 years ago, transport was the first question. If you wanted to go somewhere, you had to travel. In 2020, if you want to go somewhere, transport is the third question. And this is something I'm trying to push. It's very simple. If I want something, I go online, the first question. The second one, I go online and have it delivered. And transport is now the third question. I need to travel. Can I do it locally? Is it accessible? And this is something that we've been developing in Vectos with the SAM framework. And we're working with low carbon working with developers for low carbon villages at the moment, integrated planning for low carbon lifestyles. So we have to change the way we look at rural areas and opening new doors. Green development planning and the idea of building new rural communities is now accepted in many countries. And what you're selling is a lifestyle based on phygital access. I talked about the village effect right at the beginning, but you have to start your planning with the rural areas. Now, it's been mentioned, the impacts of COVID-19. Austerity is about to be put upon us. If it's already there. I don't want to quote Donald Trump too much, but this austerity will have an urban first planning process. And the impact of COVID-19 on rural mobility could be disastrous. What we know of eruptions in the longer term is that the lava breaks down into very rich volcanic soil. Just south of here in Montalcino, they grow the best wine in Italy. So in the longer term, new shoots come up, new innovations come forward. But how long is this going to take in a period of austerity for rural transport? One thing it is doing, and I'm sure you've read the media, is that there are new digital incomers and people who now want to move out of the cities into smaller communities. And this will be another wave of incomers and homecomers that I've talked about before. Finance, another thing, it's never talked about, but should urban areas pay for rural areas? Rural areas feed the cities. Rural areas will increasingly provide cities with new sustainable energy for lower carbon cities. And also, as our Prince Charles says, they're the lungs of the city. They provide cities with lungs to breathe at the weekend. So let us hope in the 2020s that it's payback time for rural areas and that there is investment and commitment in rural transport. And I'm sure you know from your own work in MAMBA and in other things, the coordinated planning and operations, can it be done? You know, firstly, we need a rural transport vision, but then fragmented planning and operations. You know, one of the smarter trials, and I don't single this one out as being different from the other ones, but in Kilkenny in Ireland, where I've had a bit more detailed knowledge, there are private operators, public operators, there are community-run services, there are the national operators, there is something from LEADER, there is something from the national government, all with their own agendas, all trying to put together a transport system for a community, and people on the ground working so hard to make it work, but all the barriers they're facing and are up against them. It's not just the measure, it's the 8 M's. And that's important. This is one, I'm sure you're going to put detail on this slide during the conference. So 2 more slides. There is, on a positive way, a new political momentum in Europe, in rural areas. At local level, at national level, and also at the European Parliament. Our Smarter project was an initiative from the European Parliament, indeed, not from the Commission. And it shows what can be done. There is a new political momentum in Europe, the work of the ENRD supporting, and there's a lot going on here. And the Green Deal context starting this year will add power to that. Although I notice in the Green Deal research call, there's something there, but it's not explicit. Rural mobility, as I said at the beginning, is a necessary catalyst if you're going to get social development with this new dynamic rural society and green economic growth. But it has to happen top down, bottom up, like most things. We need a strategic rural transport plan. In Vectos, we're developing something we call rural blueprints. If anyone wants to know about that, contact me. It's important. The bottom up, projects like MAMBA are showing what rural communities can achieve across a very nice geographical range of European trials. And one thing that strikes me that I mentioned earlier is that there will be MAMBA, there will be Smarter, there will be all these small range of projects going on now. But can we try and pull all this intelligence together into one home that people can relate to and people can use? And maybe it exists. Please tell me if it does. I'm not aware that it does. I think it's necessary. And my last slide is a takeaway point, really, the pathway. Rural investment in accessibility and mobility should be planned with a rural mindset. Focus on the accessibility first. And as I said, rural areas are the end of the financial food chain and indeed the research chain at the moment. And yet they're the source of the food. And let us all work together, making sure that the research we do feeds the politicians locally, give them the arguments that they need, and the 2020s can really be the payback time for rural transport. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you very much, Laurie. This was, I would say, a huge tour de force and put a lot of things into perspective for all of us. I would say it was really filled with yeah, a lot of interesting things and points which we can delve into. Yeah, I don't want to go into different points, but in general, one can say it has been, for rural mobility, it has been quite a bumpy road, like a really old, like a bumpy road in the countryside, basically. Yeah, we would also skip the questions and discussions since Laurie has an emergency board meeting and we're also running a bit overtime. So, but again, thank you very much, Laurie, for this input. Thanks so much for taking the time. Yeah, before we continue with the program, we have actually a quick peek into one of our MAMBA pilot projects, basically. But before I do that, I have a little note here. Please, you have received all the links for the breakout rooms now, but please don't enter them now. Please wait until we tell you to do so, because the program continues in the plenary at this moment. So then I would say, Natalia, please go ahead.
19 out of 20 drive alone in their car. At the same time, public transport, which has the potential to solve the problems, is economically challenged by less use, especially in the countryside where the bus run less frequently. How do we stop this negative spiral? Peer-to-peer sharing is part of the solution. We want to include private cars in the public transport system.
Okay, so much for that. It seems that we have technical issues here and we won't be able to watch it now, maybe later. But that actually saves us some time, which is a positive side effect of that. Then I would actually continue to our next presentation, which will be delivered by our dear colleague Linda Randall from Nordregio. And yeah, this will be an introduction into MAMBA and the insights we had from the project. So Linda, please go.
Thanks, Hakan, and hi everybody. And I think it wouldn't be a complete webinar without some kind of technical difficulty. So I feel a bit grateful that it happened to the video, and hopefully that means I will be safe. I'm going to share my screen with you now. Is that all fine, Hakan?
Absolutely.
Perfect, great. Okay, so first I want to say a big thank you to Laurie. I know he's not here, but I would like to say thank you to him for providing this fantastic kind of I guess big picture start to the day, because I think it's really important that even though we sort of when we zoom into kind of particular communities and particular, I guess we can say, solutions, it's really important that we have this broader context in mind. So thank you very much, Laurie. That was, I think, a great introduction. My name's Linda. I'm part of the MAMBA project. I'm from Nordregia, which is the Nordic Centre for Urban and Regional Development. And we are the research partner from MAMBA. So my role here today, I guess, is to give you a little bit of the background to how we approach rural mobility in how we approach this challenge in the project. So first of all, like, what is MAMBA? It's a nice, catchy title, but actually the long version is a bit less catchy, I would say. Maximising mobility and accessibility of services in regions affected by demographic change. So I think what's important to have in mind there is that we're interested in rural mobility, but we're particularly interested in it in this context of regions that are really struggling with these demographic trends like population aging and outmigration of young people, for example. So we use as a bit of a starting point this framework developed by the OECD and this kind of not very nicely titled cycle of rural decline. So we know we have decreasing and aging populations in rural areas. This makes it difficult. We don't have the critical mass that we need to maintain public transport. Then the services become further reduced. This impacts the quality of life in rural areas, which can potentially make them less attractive. So for, as an example, a young person who's growing up in a rural area where they feel that their access to activities is really limited by their inability to get around independently, they might be more likely to have negative feelings towards that place. And I think we can all be familiar with the sentiment of a young person saying, "Oh God, I can't wait to get out of this place when I get to a certain age." So I mean, so that's just as kind of a practical example of that. But I think also want to share with you, so thinking kind of in this, specifically in the Baltic Sea region, we can see this map shows the population change between 2000 and 2018. So to give you a bit of a picture of what does that actually look like. But I think I don't want to show this map by way of kind of saying, look how terrible the situation is. I actually want to highlight two quite different things. I want to, so by looking at this map, we can see the red areas are the areas that are experiencing population decline, but the blue areas have actually increased their populations, and many of these are rural areas as well. So I think it's important to recognise, first of all, that this grand narrative of rural decline is not universal. And then secondly, I think even where population decline is evident, so even these red areas, these really dark red areas that on the map look quite homogenous, in reality, these areas are also incredibly diverse. So although they might face the same challenges, the responses are likely to look quite different. And I think in this sense, this notion of a kind of a rural Europe can be a little bit misleading, because there is no one rural Europe. There are multiple rural Europes, and we need to be able to understand them all in order to respond appropriately. So the main focus of my presentation today is going to be on the key questions that might be helpful to us in responding to these unique circumstances. And then hopefully, if I have a little bit of time left, I would also like to talk a little bit about how these questions might relate to these specific mobility solutions that we've worked with in MAMBA. So the questions I want to talk about are, firstly, who, accessibility for whom, in what context, and within what institutional setting. So firstly, if we think about the who, there are obviously a range of factors that we can talk about, and I'm not going to go into them in great depth because some of our breakout sessions will deal with some of these. But I do just want to be really clear that no one fits into one of these boxes. These socioeconomic factors, they interact in really interesting ways. So, they obviously have a gender, they have a socioeconomic status, and they're also dynamic, they change over time. And I want to zoom in on just one, because of our focus in the MAMBA project on these demographic areas facing demographic challenges. I want to talk a little bit about age, because I think perhaps in the past, maybe it's been quite, we slip into sort of saying, okay, people over 65, and thinking that this is like one category of people. But actually, I mean, this group is both growing in size, but it's also becoming increasingly diverse. Though I suspect it was always quite diverse, but maybe now more so than ever as we're living longer. So this is just something that I've taken from some previous research, but these researchers actually did a meta-analysis of studies that looked at mobility and older people aged over 65. It didn't have a specifically rural focus, but it did include some rural studies, and I think it's still helpful for us. And they actually identified sort of 4 different categories of people aged over 65 based on their level of health and how much they depended on the private car. And they came up with these kind of 4 categories. So you can see these sort of affluent mobile drivers are really highly mobile, but they're also highly car dependent. They've been using their car their whole life, and they're quite accustomed to that. And then at the other end of the scale, you have these public transport dependent seniors they're mostly dependent on public transport or getting a lift from somebody else. But this, while we might say from an environmental perspective, great, they're using public transport. If they're in an area where public transport services might be under threat, or if their health should decline to a point that they can't use them anymore, this group of people are actually much more vulnerable than the group in the other corner. So yeah, I think it's just important to have that in mind, that this group over 65, it's a really diverse group. So moving on to the kind of where, so in what kind of context, I think this one I think is particularly interesting for us at Northern Regio, because we are working a lot with these kind of spatial questions. And I think the first and really interesting point is around this territorial context, so the actual physical attributes of a rural space. So even just within our MAMBA project, we can see this is 3 of our MAMBA regions. 2 of them are even in the same country, and we can see the darker areas are where the population is the most concentrated. So we can see in South Bosnia and North Karelia, which are both in Finland, we can see like a couple of quite large clusters of people, and then people being sort of quite dispersed along what I would imagine is probably roads. But then if we look at Vidzeme region in Latvia, the picture looks a bit different there. There are centres, but they seem to be a bit smaller, and they're sort of dotted around, and people are quite spread across the region otherwise. So the types of transport solutions that are going to work in these regions is going to be quite different. Also, of course, cultural considerations. What is the broader socioeconomic context? Safety, I think, is really important, and not necessarily just real safety. Not just the question of, is this place safe, but do people feel safe with this solution? Because even if something is very, very safe, if we have the perception that it's not, this could still be a big barrier to use. And I think digital access is something we talk increasingly more about, and I think the assumption is generally that rural areas don't have as good digital access as urban areas, and this is of course correct. There is a digital divide, but the extent of this digital divide looks different in different places. So you can see here, so the dark blue line is the, we can call it just fast broadband for the non-technical people like me. The blue line is the average of everybody, the percentage of access, and the light coloured line is only the rural households. So we see this digital divide looks quite different in for example, in Latvia, Germany, Estonia, than in the larger countries like Poland, Sweden, Finland. At the same time though, we have to also take into account that just because the technology exists doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is going to be using it. So here we have the same sort of indicators, but looking at the people who have, at people's level of digital skill. So take Finland, for example. While the digital divide in terms of technology was quite large there, we see the skill divide is also between rural areas and people in cities. It's also fairly large, but we have to see that in a context of a country where digital skills in general are quite high. So a person living in a rural area of Finland is still having sort of digital skill level around the average of someone maybe living in a city of the average European. So there's all these, I guess the point here is there's a lot of nuance within this contextual side, and the better we can understand all of this, the better we can be at coming to a mobility solution that will fit the local context. And finally, the kind of practical side, the how. And the first one I think very important is around the resource. And I think just an honesty around, okay, what resources do we have, both financial and otherwise? So also thinking about volunteers, for example. What do we have in the short, the medium, and the long term? So if we have a project that's maybe quite well funded for a short period of time, what's going to happen, after that? And how do we get the most out of what we have now? Or if we're starting off with nothing, how do we turn that into something? So I mean, of course, it's always great if we have a lot of money, but no. And I think the third point here is this coordination between different actors. And I think this one's kind of an obvious one, but I think it's also something we kind of expect to just happen. But actually it takes really a lot of work. So one of our MAMBA examples, actually the entire project was about coordinating between different actors. So at the regional level, providing a space where all of the municipal level health and community services workers could come together to try and pool their resources to improve the overall service to the region as a whole. And this was a really big undertaking. So now that we sort of identify what are these kind of questions, I just want to spend the last little bit of time just kind of mapping these sorts of solutions that we use. And just to be clear, I'm not going to tell you sort of the answers. I don't think there are any one answers. But I am going to sort of touch on what are the key considerations in each space. So for example, car sharing. When it comes to the who, I think it's important, it's good to kind of recognize that, okay, car sharing does offer this high level of kind of flexibility and autonomy. It has an environmental aspect, particularly if we're using electric vehicles, which might appeal to a particular sort of group of people. And I think I've got here not social, which seems negative, but I think for many people it can actually be, that can actually loosen a bit the behaviour change demands of this offer, I guess, because it doesn't put great social demands on people. It's really just about getting from A to B. But then on the other hand, people whose mobility is around sort of a social opportunity as well, maybe car sharing is not so appealing. In terms of where, there needs to be a central hub where so the car needs to be somewhere, and the people need to be able to get to the place where the car is. So maybe a community that's actually quite dispersed, car sharing might not work so well. Relies on a degree of digital access. I'm not aware of any car sharing examples that manage without this. And depending how it's organised, it might also require a little bit of trust between users. The initial investment's going to be high, depending on, I mean, whether or not that's actually purchasing a car, whether or not that's the arduous task of actually fundraising to purchase a car, whether or not that's the lobbying effort to perhaps have maybe the municipality offer a car from their fleet. Either way, all of those things, they take time or money. But at the same time, there is kind of revenue potential. So depending on how the subscriptions are working, this is a model that has the potential to have quite good financial sustainability if you can find sort of the right pricing model. But it will still require some maintenance. Someone still has to, there is still this ongoing cost. kind of similar example, ride sharing. I won't spend too much time. I think here I just want to kind of point out what's kind of really different between ride sharing and car sharing. So I think the main thing is around this who, and this really, there is with ride sharing a much stronger behavior change aspect. And there are these social demands on the mobility experience that perhaps that you don't have with car sharing. So thinking about how that will fit with the particular community that you're working with is really quite important. Works very well when you have many people going in the same direction. So for example, a small village that's somehow proximate to a larger centre, that maybe a lot of people are working in that place or they're undertaking an activity in that space. This one absolutely requires good level of digital access. So it might be difficult to use for people who are not so literate. And then finally, I just want to touch on this service to people notion, because especially in this kind of digital age, as Laurie mentioned, in many cases, we don't necessarily, if we think about sort of more mobile transport more from an accessibility perspective, so rather than actually I need to travel around, but I need to actually access services and goods, we can actually do that without moving now. So I think this category really pertains to a more traditional service to people approach, so where a service actually travels to a place, but also when we access services ourselves through our machines. So this could work really well if travel is not possible or desirable. There's also the environmental aspect there as well. So travel might not be desirable because of the carbon footprint. Can work very well in really isolated communities where actually transporting people is kind of difficult. If there is a really notable service deficit that everyone is experiencing, bringing that service to the people can work really well. I think the collaboration and partnership element here is really important and really strong. So yeah, shouldn't underestimate the time that will take and the long-term commitment that will require. So to kind of wrap up, know your target group, understand the local context, and consider the institutional setting early on. And I think just one thing that I want to leave you with, one idea that I want to leave you with, is that for me as a researcher in this project, I think my main takeaway has really been around the idea that innovation in rural transport, it's not about some kind of shiny, sexy solution that comes to the rescue. It's actually about social innovation, the social process. It's about the way in which something that maybe the end product is quite straightforward and is something we've been doing for 30 years, 50 years, the way that arrives in a particular community, and that social process and social innovation through which that happens, that's actually the true innovation. And thank you very much for being with us here today. And if you're interested, and we will share with you all the reports and everything, the material where all of these ideas are coming from, so that you can learn more. And I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the series.
Yes, Linda, thank you so much. That as well, I mean, was I think quite a good insight into the aspects and the considerations around the issue of rural mobility and accessibility of services, and was also a good peek into what the MAMBA project has done, and the work especially the research colleagues have done in the very beginning of the project, which then in the course of the project, of course, added up with the practical solutions implemented on the ground, and led us to these insights. Yeah, there again, you will find all these findings and the analysis and case studies, of course, in our outputs on our website. So since we're running a bit more than a bit, overtime. We will try to continue as quickly as possible. We wanted to actually quickly show you one feature which is running in the background of the conference. If Kitty, if you can hear me and see me, if you want to share your screen quickly and show our participants the surprise. So, okay.
Hello everyone. Yes, I've been visual recording the sessions and inputs so far. And if you switch to my picture, you can see the visual recording I've been drawing so far. Is it visible for everyone, Hakam?
It is visible, yeah, it is visible to me. You have to, for those who can't see it in the big screen, you have to switch to the speakers view on the upper right corner, it would be. Yes, perfect. This looks already very nice, Kitty. Thank you very much. Yeah, for our participants, so at the end of the 3 sessions actually of our web conference series, we will have a big picture basically, yeah, visualized in this format. So yeah, it's a nice thing to see and watch at the end of the sessions. Yeah, thank you, Kitty, for that little sneak peek. Then we would continue and actually move into the breakout rooms now. I would like to thank all the speakers so far and the participants as well for joining us for this first session. For those, I'm not sure whether the participants can see actually attendance. We have around 100, yeah, exactly 100 participants, which is a very good turnout. And yeah, the interest was quite high. So if you move to the breakout rooms now, we will try to show the video in the background just to test it actually, whether it actually works or there's Zoom is not able to stream it. But you can now move to the breakout rooms, and then we will yeah, meet you there with our speakers. Again, thank you very much for your attendance, and see you in 1 week for our next session. Thanks.
During rush hour, 19 out of 20 drive alone in their car. At the same time, public transport, which has the potential to solve the problems, is economically challenged by less use, especially in the countryside where the buses run less frequently. How do we stop this negative spiral? Peer-to-peer ride-sharing is part of the solution. We want to include private cars in the public transport system, and that's why we developed the NeighborGo platform, which creates matches between people going the same way. But it's more than that, because in the same platform, users can see all options with public transport. This way, they can find the best itinerary with only one search, for example, a lift with NeighborGo out in the morning and a bus home in the afternoon. To make ride-sharing an easy choice, we created digital meeting points, which enables you to make a rideshare appointment with just a few clicks. An example is the village Smidstrupskærp, which originally had 4 daily departures by bus towards the nearby city of Vejle. After we launched NeighborGo, citizens of this village now has the opportunity to get a lift to several big cities in Denmark on a daily basis. The platform shows combinations of transport, so users can often find the fastest way to their end destination. For example, a NeighborGo lift from the village to a station in the city, where they can jump on a train to their final destination. We enter into partnerships with municipalities all over the country and with several transport companies and regions. People are embracing ride-sharing, and we look forward to continue to work with partners and to engage users in Denmark and in Europe.